Hey guys, welcome back here to our second set of notes. Let's go ahead and knock out a few sections. This short little easy chapter, super cool chapter by the way. So let's get right into it here. We're looking at communities and lots of factors that shape the communities, and right now we're going to look at what's called interspecific competition. So inter is between, and so interspecific competition is competition between two different species. There's also intra-specific competition, which is competition within a species. Species might communicate or compete rather within each other, like two male deer fighting over a female, or maybe the same species competing for a water source or mates or something like that. You can compete within the species, but more often than not, we compete between two different species. It's usually not as intense as intra-specific competition because we normally shake out with a winner pretty quick, but in some cases where there's very little of a resource, like food, that competition can become very intense. Lions and hyenas, for example, their niches aren't the same, but they are very, very similar. And so they have a lot of inter-specific competition between lions and hyenas. They want to live in similar places, drink in similar places, hunt the same food sources, and so they compete relatively frequently. The requirements of two different species will always differ with more than two members of the same species. So it's gonna change with what each species requires, but when they overlap, they can compete. So species exist in their niche, their ecological niche. A niche is much more than a habitat. A habitat is like where you live, like geographically. A niche is like your role in the community. It's where you live, but it's also the interactions. What do you eat? Who eats you? How do you change your habitat? All of these things play a role in your ecological niche. The temperature range you can tolerate, where you reproduce, when you reproduce, how many young you reproduce, those are all part of the niche. So niche is much more complicated than habitat. Here's interspecific competition. We have the dead deer, great food source in what's apparently a very cold snowy forest, and then you have a northern gray wolf and a grizzly bear who are both willing to take that food source, and they're competing over this food source. So I certainly hope that picture is real because it would be very cool. Um, there are different ways of competing. There's inference competition or interference competition rather, and that is one species actively preventing another species from accessing a resource. This is interference. The wolf wants this resource. The brown bear is interfering with the wolf's ability to access this resource, this food. That's interference. One example of a scavenger chasing away another species from a carcass. Your book has a really cool picture of three scavengers on a carcass. There's an eagle, there's a fox, and there's a magpie flying by, and the eagle is the fox tries to run in for the carcass, and the eagle is actively attacking it with its claws, and it chases the fox away. So we have to exclude that other competitor from a resource that we want. The other way to compete is what's called exploitative. Each species reduces the amount of resources available by using the resource. And so you don't always have to chase them away. For example, deer don't chase away blue jays, but deer eat acorns that fall to the ground. And blue jays eat acorns that fall to the ground. So the deer population is very large, and they're eating many, many acorns. The blue jays do not have access to very many acorns. And so the deer is not actively chasing them away, but they are exploiting the resource more aggressively than the blue jays are able to, because deer have a very large gut and blue jays have a very small crop. And so deer can do a lot more damage when it comes to eating acorns quickly. So then there's competitive exclusion. Competitive exclusion, first described by Gause in the 1930s, and basically it's if two species require the same resource, someone's going to win and someone's going to lose. No two species can occupy the exact same niche and get the exact same food. Biology is not all lovey-dovey. There's winners and there's losers, and the losers starve to death. That's the way the world works. Not to sound like a jerk, but that's kind of what's up. The better competitor drives the other to extinction in the habitat. The better competitor takes over the habitat. Sometimes competing species can coexist, but when they do, the presence of each who's competing reduces the carrying capacity of the other, like the blue jays and the deer. The presence of the deer lowers the carrying capacity that that field of acorns could have had for blue jays because they're competing with each other. The blue jays might not go extinct, but the blue jays will not be nearly as successful as they could be if they would be eating all of the acorns and the deer weren't even there. So here's a cool example of this in paramecium. This is the population density over time. So you put the paramecium species, caudatum, in the water, and it makes more and more and more and more and more, and it grows to carrying capacity. You take Aurelia, you put it in the water, and it grows and grows and grows, gets to carrying capacity, and it hangs out. So you put both together. They both start to grow. Aurelia is growing fast, caudatum's growing slower. Aurelium's more aggressive and is getting more food. Aurelium starts to succeed, taking all of the resources for caudatum. Caudatum starts to decrease. Soon, caudatum is completely extinct, and the entire population is made up of just Aurelia. So that's paramecium, these little ciliated protists. One will drive the other to extinction if they're eating the same material. Alone together. So another example of this is resource partitioning. Resource partitioning is an evolutionary process where species adapt to use a shared limited resource in a way that minimizes competition. And we've seen this in birds that live in trees. 8 species of woodpecker coexisting in Oregon forests. We've seen this with other birds, little songbirds, that are putting bugs in trees like nuthatches and that kind of stuff. And it came about where, these ornithologists were looking at birds and they're like, hey, competitive exclusion says no 2 species can live in the exact same niche, but I'm looking at these species of birds and they're eating bugs, they're storing bugs in the tree, they're nesting in the tree. What the heck is going on? So they studied them more carefully and they're like, actually, this species of bird primarily inhabits the first 8 feet of the tree, 8 feet to the ground. The next species of bird primarily feeds, sings, and nests between 9 feet from the ground and 16 feet from the ground. This next species of bird, you kind of get the idea, they kind of stair step. So what we found was that they actually don't overlap into the same niche. They each have their own little micro niche carved out in the forest, their height in the tree, their location, what insects they feed on, when in the year do they nest, where do they nest. These little tiny differences allow for a much more biodiverse area because they're not actually occupying the same niche. Their niches vary in very small ways that allow them to survive. So one cool example of what happens when things start competing is what's called character displacement. And that's an effect of directional selection when species are trying to coexist and they're just trying to find a way to survive. There's a range of variation for one or more traits, and we can shift it in a direction that lessens resource competition for a limited resource. We found this with salamanders. It was really cool, but I'm going to show you a graph of this guy a little bit later. Here we have pollinators. When you grow this guy by itself, this guy has just one flower, and he gets enough pollinators to make plenty of seeds. But when we grow both these guys in the same field, Lobelia makes a few more flowers. He's purple, he's got lips on the bottom, just like this one does. Lobelia is a little better at attracting pollinators. They both make seeds, but they make fewer seeds when they're both in the same field because pollinators have to make a choice than if Mimulus is grown by itself. So there's an example of competition reducing these guys' success. Now here's the cool one with these guys here. If you grow these 2 salamanders alone, they grow to about the same size, and that's how long their bodies are. If you grow them together, they start to compete over food. So if you grow Cinereus with Hoffmanni, Hoffmanni will grow larger and Cinereus will grow smaller. And the reason this is because they eat the same thing. And so when you grow them alone, they can grow to whatever size they want. But when you grow them in a place where there's competition, some salamanders become smaller and feed on smaller insects. Other salamanders become larger and feed on larger insects so that they're trying to separate their niches so there's enough food to go around. If they stayed the same size, the competition would drive one of them to extinction. But if we can use directional selection to change their phenotypes in opposing directions, we can take a step towards potential speciation, and hopefully nobody's starving. So, predator-prey interactions. This is the very obvious community effect that you get anytime you have a predator. Predation is a type of symbiosis. It's a very close relationship between 2 animals, and predation is, not surprisingly, when one species interacts with another by capturing, killing, and eating it. and that immediately removes a prey individual from the population. And the cool thing about predator-prey populations is when you start to graph their populations, you find that different types of predators have different responses to prey densities. And there's a type 1 curve, a type 2 curve, and a type 3 curve. The type 1 curve is this top line right here. Type 1 curve, the prey killed by the predator per unit time increases linearly. Now, more often than not, a predator cannot eat all of these. It just can't be done. But in passive trappers, like a spider web, if you increase the population of flies linearly, you increase the number of flies that are stuck in the web and killed linearly. The spider's not out actively hunting these. He can't eat them that fast, but they're going to get stuck in the web and die. So it increases linearly. The spider can wrap them up, save them for later. It's the number of prey killed, not the number of prey eaten. So they're dead because they got stuck in the web. Now a type 2 curve, that's this guy. It starts off pretty linear, and then it levels out and stays steady. We see this with Arctic wolves and caribou. As you increase the caribou population, you increase the kills the wolves are able to make. More and more caribou, more and more kills, more and more caribou, more and more kills. We get to a point where your caribou are so abundant that the wolves stop killing them every single day. Because when a wolf kills a caribou, it takes a while for the pack to eat an entire caribou and then get hungry and then to decide to hunt more. That takes some time. And so there is a limit. Down here, they can eat that whole caribou and go out for more. But as the caribou become very, very abundant, 1 caribou per kilometer, then the kills per day levels off because we don't need to kill 1 caribou every 2 days to feed a pack of wolves. You just don't need that much caribou. And so they're limited by the time it takes for them to eat and digest their meal and be ready to run again and hunt again. That's what limits them. The type 3 curve is really weird. It starts off slow and then it goes up high. And what this is, there's a few things that can cause this, but one of them is prey that's really good at hiding. And the predators can't find them when the population is low. But as the prey population becomes very high, they can't hide anymore, and the predators can find them. And so that's one way to get a type 3 curve, and there are a couple other ways, but that's a cool example. So there's cyclic changes in abundance. Some predator and prey species undergo what appear to be coupled cyclic changes. So the population of the prey and the population of the predator seem to be very closely linked. The prey abundance regulates the predator numbers, right? The predator abundance regulates the prey numbers. Makes sense. Example of this is the Canadian lynx, which is like a big old bobcat, and the snowshoe hare. And we thought we had really good data for this, and then some scientists, Krebs and some other workers, found that this is not that true. Because one, the snowshoe hare has multiple predators. It's not just lynx. Owls eat them, eagles eat them, lots of things eat rabbits. Also, the food availability affects hare density. They found that if you just removed the lynx completely and just gave the hares the run of the land for a plot, that they would still do this cycle. The hares would make so many babies that they would eat all the food in the area, and then the population would tank because they had eaten all the food, and then it would kind of rebound. So these cyclic changes are really multiple levels. There's, how many rabbits do we have? How much food do they have? Is disease spreading? And what predators are eating them? It's much more complicated. But here's trapping records that are from the Hudson Bay pelts sold by trappers. And this goes back to 1845. So you got to respect the amount of data they have. That's insane. That's like 100 years of data. That's ridiculous. And so here's the hare population, booms. The lynx population rises. When the lynx rise, the hare crash. The lynx crash. The hare rise. The lynx rise. The hare crash. The lynx crashes. You get the idea. Up, down, up, down, up, down with the hare. Up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down with the lynx. Trying to regulate the hares. When there's lots of hares, there's lots of food. So you get lots of lynx. Lots of lynx eat lots of hare. And then the hares are all gone. And the lynx start to starve. And round and round and round she goes. All right, so we're going to stop at the evolutionary arms race. That's a couple of sections. We will pick up there next time. Thank you for your time.